The drive to Grandma Evelyn's house was quiet, filled only with the hum of old tires on uneven asphalt. My parents sat stiffly in the front seat, exchanging the kind of tight-lipped glances I'd learned to dread. I stared out the window, counting the telephone poles flashing past, my stomach twisting tighter with each one. When we pulled into Grandma's long gravel driveway, the familiar weight of dread settled over me. Her house loomed like a stubborn sentinel against the wild, wind-beaten field behind it. The front porch sagged just enough to suggest it had given up caring about appearances a long time ago. I envied it. "We're staying long?" I asked, pretending not to care. My mom adjusted her cardigan, her fingers trembling slightly. "Just for a while." My dad cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes entirely. "Help your mom grab your things from the trunk." I stepped out, the cold air biting through my hoodie. The sharp smell of wood smoke and damp earth filled my lungs. For a moment I imagined this was just a weird weekend trip. A break from doctor's appointments, from quiet arguments behind closed doors. But when I saw how little they'd packed for themselves, my chest tightened. Before I could say anything, Grandma's screen door creaked open. She stood in the doorway, wiry and weathered, her sharp eyes narrowing like she could see straight through me. "You're early," she said. My dad shifted his weight. Change of plans. Her gaze flicked to me, lingering just long enough to make me feel exposed. "Come in before the cold sets in your bones." We shuffled inside, where the familiar scent of cinnamon and something medicinal wrapped around me. The house was exactly as I remembered, stubbornly unchanged. Thick quilts draped over the worn-out sofa, shelves crammed with yellowed paperbacks and dusty trinkets that seemed older than Grandma herself. While my parents whispered with her in the kitchen, I drifted to the fireplace, staring into the lazy flames. I pressed my hands close, letting the heat sink into my frozen fingers. A single, frayed stocking hung from the mantel, just hers. The murmuring stopped. I turned to see my mom wringing her hands like she wanted to wring something out of existence. My dad's face was stone-hard, avoiding eye contact. "Be good, Ellie," my mom whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. Before I could ask what she meant, they were gone. The front door banged shut behind them, echoing through the quiet house. I ran outside, breath sharp and ragged in the freezing air. Their car kicked up gravel as it sped down the road. "Wait!" I shouted, sprinting after them until my lungs burned and my legs buckled. The sound of their tires faded into the wind, leaving only brittle silence. I crumpled to the ground, gasping, my chest heaving in sharp, painful bursts. My inhaler. I fumbled through my pocket, hands shaking too much to grip it properly. Before I could fall apart completely, a firm hand gripped my shoulder. "Breathe slow," Grandma Evelyn ordered, not unkindly. Her steady fingers guided mine around the inhaler, and I managed a shaky puff, the medicine burning its familiar path down my throat. My breath slowed, though the ache in my chest lingered. "They're not coming back, are they?" I rasped. She didn't flinch, didn't soften. "No, they're not." I wanted to scream, cry, demand answers. But there was something unyielding in her expression that rooted me in place. Her hand stayed on my shoulder, steady and firm. "You'll be all right," she said, not like a reassurance but a command. "Now get up." The next few days were a blur of cold mornings and hard chores. Grandma Evelyn wasted no time putting me to work, splitting firewood, hauling buckets of water from the well, feeding Rufus, her cranky old cat who hissed at everything that moved. "You want to sit around feeling sorry for yourself?" she snapped one morning when she caught me lingering by the window, hoping for something, anything, to appear down the long, empty driveway. "This ain't a place for quitting." I hated her for that, but I hated myself more for still hoping. The only thing that kept me going was the typewriter I found in the attic. Dusty and ancient, its keys stuck and clattered like angry insects. I spent hours pounding away on it, spilling out stories about fierce heroines with swords who never got left behind, whose scars made them stronger, not disposable. One night, after a bitter windstorm knocked out the power, I sat typing by candlelight until my fingers ached. The cold crept in through the thin walls, making the air sharp and brittle. "Still writing that nonsense?" Grandma's voice startled me from the doorway. She held a blanket in her arms, her expression unreadable. "It's not nonsense," I muttered. She stepped closer, laying the blanket over my shoulders. "Good. Keep at it." Her fingers brushed my cheek, rough but gentle, and just like that, she was gone, disappearing into the dark hallway. I sat there for a long time, the soft weight of the blanket warming me more than the dying fire ever could. The winter dragged on with relentless cold, the wind howling through every crack in Grandma's old house. I kept myself busy with school and the endless list of chores she invented daily. She didn't believe in idle hands. "Work keeps the mind sharp," she'd say while thrusting a broom or a stack of logs into my arms. School wasn't much of a refuge. Everyone at Clear Lake High had known each other since kindergarten. They saw me as the weird new girl who limped down the halls and kept her head down. My joints always ached worse in the cold, forcing me to wear stiff braces on my wrists and knees. The looks I got weren't cruel, just curious, like I was a strange exhibit they weren't sure how to classify. By some miracle, I found a tiny patch of humanity at lunch when Mason Clark dropped onto the bench next to me without warning. He was tall and wiry, with a perpetual mop of curly hair that made him look like he'd been electrocuted. "You're sitting in my spot," he announced, grinning like a man who just pulled off the heist of the century. "There's literally no one here," I deadpanned, gesturing to the entire empty table. "Exactly," he said, as if that explained everything. "I'm Mason. Ellie." He tilted his head thoughtfully. "Ellie, what's your tragic backstory?" I snorted. "What? Everyone's got one," he said, stealing a fry from my tray like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You don't end up in this town without a tragic backstory." Before I could decide if he was crazy or just painfully bored, a girl with bubblegum pink hair plopped down across from me. "Are you traumatizing the new girl already?" she asked Mason, rolling her eyes. "Lila, meet Ellie. Ellie, meet Lila. She does tarot readings at lunch and swears she can see ghosts." Lila shot him a withering look. "Don't listen to him. He's just mad that I predicted he'd fail algebra, and he did." "You hexed me?" Mason hissed, clutching his chest dramatically. Despite myself, I laughed. A sharp, sudden sound that felt foreign after months of silence. They both stared, wide-eyed, like they discovered some rare creature. "There it is," Mason cheered. "We got her." I didn't understand it then, but they'd already decided I was one of them. No questions asked. Winter finally released its grip in April, and the world softened around the edges. The thaw brought wildflowers along the edges of Grandma's yard and warmer evenings spent on the porch with Rufus curled at my feet. One Saturday afternoon, Mason and Lila insisted on dragging me into town for what they called cursed movie night. Apparently, the local thrift store sold old VHS tapes no sane person would watch willingly. We picked something called Zombie Cheerleaders from Outer Space. It sounded awful enough to be perfect. Mason's house was a chaotic mess of half-finished art projects and mismatched furniture. His mom was a sculptor with wild, paint-streaked hair and a personality that lit up the whole room. "You must be Ellie," she said, wiping clay from her hands before pulling me into a tight, paint-smelling hug. "I've heard all about you." My cheeks burned. "Good things, I hope?" "Mostly," she teased. "Now grab a soda and prepare for cinematic suffering." The movie was every bit as awful as expected. Bad acting, laughable effects, and a plot held together with duct tape and prayer. But we howled with laughter, throwing popcorn at the screen during the worst scenes. For the first time in forever, I felt free. Like maybe the weight of my parents' abandonment didn't have to crush me every second of every day. I returned home late, stomach aching from too much laughter and stale popcorn. The house was dark, except for the soft orange glow of the fireplace. Grandma was still awake, her favorite worn notebook open on her lap. "Have fun?" she asked, not looking up. "Yeah." I hesitated near the doorway, feeling suddenly exposed. "They're good people." She nodded slowly. Good friends are worth holding on to. Hard to come by. I shifted awkwardly. You ever have friends like that? Her gaze stayed fixed on the fire. Once. I waited, but she didn't say more. I almost left it alone, but something made me push. What happened? Her jaw tightened just slightly. Life happened. The finality in her tone ended the conversation, but it stuck with me long after I'd gone to bed. Spring turned into summer, and life settled into something close to normal, or as normal as it could be for someone still waiting for her parents to reappear like a bad dream. One sticky afternoon, I found Grandma sitting on the porch with her old leather photo album. Its cracked cover and yellowed pages looked ready to fall apart at any second. She gestured for me to sit, surprising me. Thought you'd want to see this. The photos were faded but vivid snapshots of a younger, softer version of Grandma. In one, she stood next to a tall, dark-haired man in military dress, his arms slung casually around her shoulders. "Your grandfather," she said quietly, her voice softer than I'd ever heard. "Daniel." I traced the edge of the photo. "He looks kind." He was. Her voice cracked just slightly. "Lost him too soon." I nodded, feeling something tighten in my chest. Not sadness exactly, but recognition. Grief was something we both understood, even if neither of us liked to talk about it. After a long silence, she closed the album gently, as if afraid the memories might spill out and break. "Go on," she said briskly, waving me off. "I've got work to do." But as I walked away, I couldn't help glancing back. For the first time, she looked small, not unyielding or fierce, but just a woman trying to hold together a past that kept slipping through her fingers. Summer burned bright and relentless, stretching endlessly like the dusty dirt roads winding through Clear Lake. School was out, leaving me with more time than I knew what to do with. Mason and Lila kept me sane, dragging me to the lake, late-night bonfires, and half-baked, ghost-hunting missions through abandoned barns that left us covered in spiderwebs and laughing until we couldn't breathe. But no amount of distraction could shield me from the creeping feeling that something was about to crack. It started with a letter. The envelope was thin, with my parents' familiar, looping handwriting scrawled across the front. My breath hitched as I held it, the paper trembling between my fingers. I debated tossing it into the fire, but something in me couldn't let go. Not yet. I tore it open in one sharp movement, scanning the carefully worded lines. "We're sorry. Needed to start over. Hope you understand." The words hit like hollow punches. There was no comeback. No, "we miss you." Just a neat ending, like I'd been a chapter they were ready to close. I sat frozen until the letter slipped from my hand, carried off by the soft summer breeze. The old ache returned, raw and relentless. I was disposable, unwanted. I thought about telling Grandma, but the idea of sharing that wound felt too unbearable. Instead, I threw myself into fixing the broken porch steps that had been sagging since spring. The hammer felt steady in my hand, the rhythmic pounding giving my restless mind something solid to hold on to. Grandma found me there after sunset, sweat-soaked and exhausted. "Something on your mind?" she asked, lighting a cigarette with practiced ease. The tiny flare of the match lit her sharp, knowing eyes. "No," I lied, driving another nail into the stubborn wood. She studied me in silence before sitting on the porch steps, knees cracking like old hinges. "Your hands are shaking." I stilled, my grip on the hammer tightening. "Want to tell me what's got you wound up like a cornered cat?" She pressed gently, her tone softer than usual. I hesitated, the words clawing their way up my throat. "They wrote me." My voice cracked despite myself. "My parents." Her face didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Understanding, maybe. "They're not coming back," I added quickly, the words bitter on my tongue. "They just wanted to explain. Like that makes it better." Grandma nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "People leave for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes it's about you. Sometimes it's about them being too damn scared to stay." I swallowed hard, the truth of it cutting deeper than I expected. "They were supposed to be my family," I whispered. But they didn't even fight for me. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the soft scent of wildflowers. For a long time, neither of us spoke. "Family isn't always who you're born to," she said finally, her voice steady. "It's who stays, who shows up when it's hard." Her hand rested lightly on mine, rough, warm, real. The days passed in a haze of sticky heat and long, quiet evenings on the porch. I thought the worst was behind me until I woke one night gasping for air, my chest tight and unyielding. Panic clawed at my throat as I fumbled for my inhaler. Empty. I stumbled down the hall, desperate and dizzy, collapsing against the kitchen table. Before I could fall completely, strong arms caught me, holding me steady. "Breathe, damn it." Grandma's voice was sharp and commanding, cutting through the fog. She forced me upright, her hands gripping my shoulders like iron. I gasped, fighting for air until finally, mercifully, the tightness eased. The world stopped spinning. By the time I could speak, she was already shoving shoes onto my feet. "Hospital," she barked, hauling me toward the old pickup without waiting for an argument. I woke hours later in a sterile hospital room, the beeping of machines dull and steady. My chest ached, but I was breathing slow, steady breaths that felt like salvation. Grandma sat by the window, her arms crossed like she was daring the universe to try anything else. The harsh hospital light made her look older, more fragile, but her expression was as fierce as ever. "You scared the hell out of me," she muttered without turning around. "Sorry?" I rasped, my throat raw. She snorted softly. "Don't be stupid. Just don't do that again." Her voice cracked at the end, barely audible, but it undid something in me. She cared. Fiercely, stubbornly, but she cared. When we got home, things shifted in subtle, unspoken ways. She checked my meds without comment, left cold water on my nightstand when she thought I was asleep. And late one evening, when I pulled out my typewriter, I found a fresh stack of paper waiting for me. Weeks later, on the first crisp day of fall, I sat on the porch with a notebook balanced on my knees, scribbling stories about fierce girls who fought for themselves and found homes where they least expected. The past still lingered like an old scar, faint but present. As I watched the wind tug leaves from the trees, I realized something important. I wasn't just the girl who got left behind. I was Ellie Matthews, writer, survivor, and granddaughter of the fiercest, toughest woman I'd ever known. And for the first time, that felt like enough.